Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. Apologies in advance if I'm looking slightly hot and sweaty. It is record-breakingly hot here in the UK, but we have got a fantastic guest and a fantastic subject for you. I will let her introduce herself. Lady Gwyn, do you want to say hi?
Yes, hello. Very nice to be back with you here today. Really happy to talk about one of my favorite topics from A Song of Ice and Fire. Real pleasure to be with you.
Well, that is a very understated hello. So Lady Gwyn is one of the OGs in the Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire community. If you do not know her, please check out Radio Westeros, which is a fantastic podcast, and also the website, which I have to say I was saying to her before we went live, when I'm looking for thoughts and theories for my Rhaegar and Lyanna and Robert's Rebellion kind of series of videos, I always seem to come back to that. I don't always agree, but the thinking is amazing. So I am really excited to have you on board. Why don't we just start with kind of like an open question? I know we've had a couple of super chats. We'll come to them in just a moment. But just like, what's your overall view on the kind of like the Rhaegar and Lyanna thing? Was it love? Was it expediency? What's your general view on what's going on
there? Yeah. Well, my general view is that we can best describe it as one of three things. It was either kidnap and rape, which is what some of the people think. It was either an elopement, which other people think, or it was something else entirely. I fall into the something else entirely. I think that there was a hefty dose of prophecy informing the actions of Rhaegar Targaryen, and I think that there was some important backstory from recent events, which I'm sure we'll talk about, namely the tourney of Harrenhal, which informed what happened and led to what ultimately was a romance, because I think there are lots of hints and, just implications that there was a romance. So whether that was the initial intent or not, I think I often fall on the side of we don't have enough information to make a fully informed judgment. So we're speculating, but in the realm of speculation, yes, romance.
I mean, I'm with you on this. I think that it is romance. I think that there is a hint of Rhaegar doing what he thinks prophecy should tell him to do. But I think we'll unpack that in a moment. I just want to get to a couple of super chats. Morgan R.R. Hayes, thank you so much for a couple of super chats beforehand, saying thanks for all the great content. You are very welcome. And Maura Lee saying, in memory of both Elia and Lyanna, who each met the god of death with grace, dignity, and incredible courage. For Robert and Lady Gwyn, love and enjoy both your channels. Excellent. So as another kind of opener here, and this is something I picked up from Twitter, Anna Claudio Paggio, I probably mispronounced that, apologies, said, do we still care after Bran ended up as king and no one recognized Jon as a Targaryen and rightful heir to the throne? So this is a kind of a book versus show question. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, my take is that the book will cover the big beats of what was on the show, or probably vice versa. The big message about Jon and his kind of parentage was that it didn't fundamentally make a huge difference. Do you think that that is going to be the same in the books as it was on the show?
Well, if by huge difference do we mean that Jon is going to end up being the king or, fighting for his claim, I don't think that's the case. I think it will be more or less, like you said, the big beats that, it will ultimately be like the show. However, in substance, the books, I believe, will show a very different story to us. They'll show something that's much more fleshed out. We'll get a lot more nuance. We'll get a lot more kind of places where we can think about why it did matter, because it does matter, and there has to be some narrative purpose to building up this big mystery and arc for Jon Snow. So we're just going to wait and see. The books are going to surprise us.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, that the fact that Jon is Rhaegar and Lyanna's child is important, because you can't have this huge mystery in the books without it meaning something. And on the show, it actually, yes, they rushed it, but it did mean something, because it created this divide between those who were supporting Jon for the throne, those who were supporting Dany for the throne. It influenced what Tyrion did, what Varys did, what Sansa did. It actually had a huge impact on what was going on. So I think we do still care, but I think that what the show is trying to tell us is that Jon, and I think we knew this already, to be honest, Jon is not this stereotypical hero who's this kind of orphan boy brought up in a castle, but secretly he's the heir to the throne and the child of prophecy, and he's going to become the king of everything. That is not his story. And I think that is what the show was trying to tell us, is that he's going to be set up as this, but he's not going to end up in the kind of the Aragorn role. Would you kind of agree with that as a kind of a structure?
I would, and I would actually draw a comparison, which is actually, as I've done in the past, to King Arthur, who was a legendary hero, who fit that sort of trope of the boy that was raised in secret, ignorance of his true parentage, grew up to become a hero, that saved the land. Now, some of the King Arthur legends actually pose him as more of a type of a war leader. So whether he was, a king in the true sense of the word, or whether he was a, just someone who, joined people together and kind of spearheaded this defense against a great enemy. That sounds a lot like Jon Snow, doesn't it? King Arthur also sailed away. He didn't get to sit and enjoy that victory. He, in the legends, he went off into the sunset, a lot like Arya did in the show. He sailed away to the island of Avalon, which is actually, if you look at Jon, he kind of sails away, metaphorically speaking, beyond the wall. So, I think we're not dealing with the stereotypical hero becomes king like Aragorn, but maybe we're dealing with something a little bit older, a little more subtle.
Yeah,
he's still he's still a hero. I mean,
he is. Hero trope.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that I frame it, I'm a Lord of the Rings geek. The way that I frame it is that George R.R. Martin is setting up Jon Snow to be Aragorn, but secretly he's Frodo. And so that's how I see it, is that he is going to, as Frodo also headed off at the end of it.
Yes.
World weary. He did his duty, but he could not inherit the world that he saved. And so that is how I see Jon Snow's role. I want to not leave the King Arthur thing, because I know you've got a theory about this that I just want to pick up in just one moment. Stephen Stark, thank you so much for the super chat. It was great to meet you, by the way, in Nashville. Stephen saying, I have family in town, so I can't stay. Just wanted to say hello, Robert. LG, Lady Gwyn is fantastic. I agree. I can't wait to watch this later. But I did say to you before, what I would love is for you to share your and I can't remember exactly what you called it, but sort of the in at the crossroads theory about Rhaegar and Lyanna, because this is something I came back to a lot of times when I was trying to work my way through what actually happened with Rhaegar and Lyanna. So could you just, like, in a high level form, tell us what your theory is about Rhaegar and Lyanna and the Inn of the Crossroads?
Okay, and I will give a brief explanation of why King Arthur is a great segue into that, because it was thinking about King Arthur that made me, or some of the King Arthur legends, that first made me wonder about this. In some versions of King Arthur, now I'm going to kind of shift over and talk about Lancelot. Lancelot rescues Queen Guinevere from being burned to death. She's been discovered to have, well, actually, she's been discovered to have been having an affair with Lancelot, and the king condemns her to death. So it was this kind of death by fire thing, and Lancelot coming in and saving her, that made me first start to wonder, following the turning of Harrenhal, if King Aerys had discovered that Lyanna was indeed the Knight of the Laughing Tree, what might he have done? We know he was paranoid. We know that he thought everyone was working against him. We know that he was burning people alive. He had been doing that well before he burnt the Starks. So if he had discovered that Lyanna Stark had, sort of been the Knight of the Laughing Tree, and he really thought in his paranoia that the Knight of the Laughing Tree was no friend of his and was conspiring against him, might he have sent some soldiers to pick her up and bring her back to face the king's justice, which in that case would have been fire? And if he had done that, would Rhaegar, if he found out, have just sat by and let his father burn the daughter of one of the Lord Paramounts of the realm? Probably not. I think what we know about Rhaegar, amongst other things, is that he was honorable. A lot of people think of him as a very honorable person, Barristan Selmy amongst them. I think there's a pretty good chance that if that was the situation, Rhaegar would have set off to rescue her. And lo and behold, the World of Ice and Fire came out and talks about Rhaegar going into the Riverlands kind of all of a sudden on some undefined mission with 6 of his closest companions. Selected the inn at the crossroads as a very likely location based on some of the facts that we know. Brandon had gone out on an errand from Riverrun. Lyanna, we think, was in the area still, so that would have been a likely meeting place if they were going to hook up to return to Riverrun for Brandon and Kat's wedding. There's also the fact that the inn at the crossroads is the location of another very, very important kidnapping, Catelyn and Tyrion. So we see that happen, and if you think about it in those terms, there's quite a big parallel there. A kidnapping that sort of set off a war kind of thing. Although that's a very, in both cases, a very oversimplified view of the causes of the war. But it's just kind of a neat little parallel. And we know George does like to, play with repeating things, history repeating itself. So that's it in a nutshell. There's a lot more ins and outs, and we do cover it in our in at the Crossroads episode, and once again in our most recent we did an episode about Lyanna about a month ago. So
and I have to say, I love this theory. I love the kind of the Arthurian kind of overlay onto what we've got going on. I think I absolutely agree that the Inn of the Crossroads was the meeting place. I think that was what was going on. I think the symbolism there about the crossroads is that you talked about, the Tyrion abduction, that it's very clear this is a point of crossroads, a decision place. Things could go one way or another way, and it works so well for me that is where this happened. I'm not so sure about on a personal level, the Lyanna being rescued thing. I'm a big fan of Lyanna having a lot more volition than that, I have to say. But I've got videos on that if you want to investigate that. If you want to hear more on Lady Gwyn's side, go and have a listen to Radio Westeros. But we had a lot of questions. Well, first of all, for people who are asking, it is hot. Dan the dog is doing okay. He's lying down there. This apparently is the coolest place in the house, and he is fast asleep down there. But people have been asking on the basis of R plus L equals J, which I think we're both very much agreeing on. What is Jon's given name in the books? Because on the show, then they came out with this theory that this was Aegon was his name. I'm tending to the view that probably it was Aegon. Very happy to go into that in a moment, but I'd love to hear your thoughts whether Aegon actually is his given name. The assumption here we have to say is that his given name is a kind of Targaryen name rather than a northern name. But what do you think? Do you think Aegon would be his given name in the books?
I think, and I see some people in the chat agree with me. I think I've always been on the Aemon side,
okay.
mainly because there's a lot, seem to be quite a few hints in the text that Aemon could be it. There's a kind of clever little tongue-in-cheek one where Jon is thinking about Maester Aemon, and he thinks in his internal monologue something to the effect of, nor was he Aemon Targaryen, which the irony, if indeed he is a Targaryen. Of course, it could be, they could be just straight up, no, he's not Aemon Targaryen, he's Aegon Targaryen. I'm not, 100% wedded to that theory, but Jon had also, when they talked about the roles that he and Rob used to kind of role play when they were kids, playing these famous heroes. One of the ones that Jon had particularly kind of played at was Aemon Targaryen, the Dragon Knight. So, Aegon.
I mean, I like, my heart wants it to be Jaehaerys as a kind of a conciliator thing. My head takes me to, and none of this, to be honest, I'm not wedded to any of this. And if we find out in the books, whatever name is given, that's fine by me. My head takes me to the fact that when he was named, Lyanna was the person who named him. So Aegon probably said, I'm expecting a daughter, and my daughter's name is going to be Visenya. That is probably what he left her with, because he was trying to recreate the three heads of the dragon as best as we can understand. So when a son comes along, this was unexpected. Rhaegar wasn't there, and Lyanna will probably have been told Rhaegar's dead and both of his children are dead. So my thought is it makes sense that if she wants to then honor Rhaegar in some way, she would name her newborn son after either Rhaegar or his dead firstborn son, Aegon. Knowing that he was wanting to kind of meet all these prophecies. So I'm kind of like, I didn't particularly like it initially, but I kind of get the idea it might be Aegon, simply because this is Lyanna doing the naming, not anyone else. And if we try and get inside her head in what was going on at that moment, then maybe. That's based purely on a character-driven thing, rather than where you're coming from is very much a textual, what are the hints that are going on there with Aemon. I love the idea as Aemon. I also love Jaehaerys, but I'm marginally going to go with Aegon. Okay, let's pick up on a question from one of my patrons. And this is more of a kind of a what if question. We had a couple of questions like this, actually, but this is from Casey Corbridge, saying, what do you think would happen or would have happened had Lyanna and Jon both survived the Tower of Joy? And then there's a sort of a second question about what if Lyanna had lived and Rhaegar died and Rhaegar and Jon lived. But and then also Cap Girl of the North, new subscriber. Hi, great to have you, saying interested to hear the answer to this. So what if Lyanna had lived? I think is a fascinating question, because when if anyone, if we go that Bloodraven was planning all of this kind of idea, then nobody knew that Lyanna was about to die. She died at that moment, and so it was like, okay, now we're going to have to decide what to do with baby Jon. What if she had lived? What do you think would have? What was the plan? Do you have an idea?
Well, not really. I think that when I think about this, if she had lived and Rhaegar had died, so let's say everything else happened the way it happened, and she just didn't die having the baby, which, in medieval times, people died or they didn't die. I mean, there's an equal chance that she did or she didn't. So did we lose Robert?
I'm still here.
Okay, I lost your video. Okay, sorry. I think that everything would have pretty much played out all the same. I think that they would have had to hide the baby. She probably would have had to, go on, marry Robert or something. They would have had to basically conduct the same sort of a cover-up, assuming that Rhaegar was dead. I mean, the danger to the child would have been the same, correct? If Rhaegar is dead, it's not like they could just say, "Oh well, Rhaegar is dead, but Robert, look, here's Lyanna and here's her little baby." So I think things wouldn't have changed very much unless Rhaegar had lived, and that of course would have put a very different complexion on things, because I do believe that they were married, which is maybe something we could talk about in a little bit. But then, that would have obviously changed Lyanna's kind of going forward, what she was going to do with her life. Robert would have been defeated, possibly dead. So, there's so many variables when you talk about if one thing had happened instead of the other thing. That's hard to say, but I don't think if it was just Lyanna living, I don't think that would have changed anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with this. I think that if Rhaegar had lived, the only way Rhaegar would have lived is if he won and Robert's rebellion was defeated in some way. And he had plans for that. He was going to overthrow his father effectively, or sort of a coup in some way. He would have established himself as the new king. I think Lyanna, maybe he would have, so Elia, who he cared about, but she couldn't have any more children, so Lyanna would have been established at court in some way, and I think that that's where life would have carried on in that way. If Rhaegar was dead but Lyanna had survived, I think you're absolutely right. I would agree completely. I think that her life would be in danger, or her son's life would be in danger anyway, and she would probably have had to go off into exile somewhere, hidden away. There would still have to be some kind of plot to tell Robert Baratheon that she was gone, because there is no way that she would have wanted to marry him.
No.
And Robert would have wanted to marry her, so she would have had to go into hiding some way. Her son Jon would have had to go off either with her or be hidden away in the same way that he was in the story that we have. So I think that it actually doesn't make huge amounts of difference. As long as Rhaegar died, then actually it doesn't make huge amounts of difference what's going on. We did have a super chat, thank you very much, from Steph Snow, saying, still licking wounds from season 8. Any advice on how to shake off the awful HBO conclusions? What was the consensus at Con of Thrones? I'll talk about Con of Thrones in a moment. I should probably say I don't think that there was a consensus at Corner of Thrones on anything. I think there was just a general outpouring of love for the show and the books. To be honest, I think that was the general feeling I got. But in terms of how to shake off the HBO conclusions, my take, I would love to hear yours in a moment, but my take on season 8 is that its biggest crime was that it was rushed. It wasn't so much that it came to the wrong endings. It missed out huge amounts. Therefore, for example, I suspect that what Dany did with King's Landing was or will be in a completely different context in the books that will make a whole lot more sense. I think that there are a whole lot of things that will echo in the books that happened on the show, like Jaime and Cersei dying together. I think they will die together. I don't think necessarily they'll die together in the same way. I think that there's every possibility that Bran will end up as king, but I think that it'll be slightly less shocking. That makes sense. I think that the showrunners are very keen, or were very keen, on using surprise as a cinematic tool in a way that I suspect George R. R. Martin will not. I'm going to, at some point very soon, I'm going to get Aziz, History of Westeros, on here, who has done a reread of the books. He reads them, as far as I can tell, about every month. And he has gone through deliberately looking for any foreshadowing of Bran as king. And I was talking to him, and he says it's astonishing when you read through again with that kind of filter. Is there any hint here that Bran is going to become king? He says that it's very, very, very strong. So I think that the season 8's greatest crime was the speed at which they did stuff, and the fact that they left out huge amounts of other plots that were important to the end game, like the whole Aegon stuff, which will have impacted on what we actually saw, which made some of the endings and payoffs feel a little bit disjointed. So that's my overall take on what happened with season 8, but I would love to hear yours, Lady Gwyn.
Yeah. So first of all, I think we wanted to know what was, recommendation to shake it off, and my recommendation is rereading. That seems to be what a lot of people are doing. Start your reread and start imagining what Winds of Winter and Dream of Spring might show us, and how those character arcs might be developed and get to the places that they got in season 8, which I completely agree with you that it was very rushed. We saw a lot of things at the hi Chase. We saw a lot of things happen just at such top speed that character arc development, things that are of just so much importance to A Song of Ice and Fire and George R. R. Martin were sacrificed. He doesn't go in for big surprises. I like what you said about the show using surprise as a device. I don't think George does that. He lays things out, and he gets kind of that 3-step reveal. So he's always hinting at things and foreshadowing, or big things like that. Especially something like Bran being king, or Dany burning King's Landing. Those things are all going to be foreshadowed in the books. And Aziz is right, that they have been already. Both Dany's ending, Dany's actions are being set up. I think we have a long ways to go before we get to the ending that the show gave us. But I don't think that when we get there in the books, it's going to be a huge surprise. So, if you want to shake off, if you have bad feelings after season 8, just get back into the books and all the wonderful details and foreshadowings and character development that we have in the books.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I saw a couple of people in the chat talking about other books and series which have influenced A Song of Ice and Fire. things like Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow and Thorn series, which I would highly recommend. The Farseer series from Robin Hobb, again, I would highly recommend. These kind of things give kind of hints and inspiration to A Song of Ice and Fire, which I recommend them in and of themselves. But if you're looking for an extra angle to come into A Song of Ice and Fire, I would very much recommend them. And just Mama Joe, I saw saying, I think the showrunners got into a pickle wanting to stick to George R. R. Martin's ending without having all the middle pieces from him. I think that that's a really insightful comment. Mm-hmm. I think that I probably said it before, but my view in terms of when I say it's rushed, there were a lot of things that the payoffs weren't they weren't earned by the amount of time that was built into building up to them. For example, we have Jaime and Brienne. Their relationship was probably 2 scenes, really. Jon and Dany, if you break it down, between them getting together on the boat and Jon discovering that actually, you know what, she's his aunt, again, probably 2 scenes. We didn't actually get to see those relationships develop, and therefore it didn't have the emotional hit that it probably should have done to see those relationships break down. So that again, that's another element of the kind of the rushed bit of season 8. And I suspect that over time we will, as a community, come more and more to it an understanding of there are so many good things about season 8. The music was great, the acting was great, the costumes were great. There were so many fantastic things about it. What held it back was the fact that it should have been 2 seasons, not 1. That's just my take on it. Anime lover Nicole, hi, good to see you, saying, what do you think would have happened if they all lived? I think we've covered that one already. But James Sidney, great to see you in Nashville, said, given what we know about Rickard Stark's Southron ambitions, do you think he would have been open to a Lyanna-Rhaegar union had Rhaegar informed him? So what do you think of this? The Southron ambitions thing, obviously we haven't a huge amounts of detail about what the aim of these Southron ambitions were, but do you think that Rickard Stark, this is Lyanna and Ned's father, would have been open to the idea of a Lyanna and Rhaegar match?
At the point at which it probably would have arisen, in my opinion, no, not if Rickard was anything like his son. She was already promised to Robert at that point, and I just don't see him abandoning that. However, I did like, if that was one of the questions from your patrons, I think there was a follow-on bit of that where he posited the Baratheon rebelling over a broken engagement, which of course he's referring to a parallel between Aegon the Unlikely's son, who broke an engagement with Lionel Baratheon's daughter. So, and then rebelled, and of course he was defeated in, I think, single combat by Sir Duncan the Tall. Like the idea of that as a, possible parallel. In other words, I don't think Rickard would have approved of it, but it would have been something more along the lines of, oh my gosh, what have these crazy kids gotten me into? And, would have had to be dealing with the outcome. I think if he was a loving father, which there's no indication that he wasn't, he would have had to accept it. I don't think he would have suggested it or agreed with it beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. My take is when we talk about Southron ambitions, we have to ask what the ambitions were.
Yeah. And
my take is they were probably, in the absence of any direct information, because we never get, obviously, a Rickard Stark chapter or anything like that. In the absence of any direct information, we have to assume that this was independence for the North or something along those lines. It wasn't that he wanted to be king himself. It wasn't that he just enjoyed politics, as far as we can tell. He didn't seem to go down south all that much himself. So it seems to be about the getting rid of Targaryen rule and probably getting independence for the North. If that's the case, as seems to be implied by setting up all these alliances with the houses that are sort of bordering the North and then moving south, the idea of keeping the Targaryen rule going by marrying into it possibly would fit in, as long as Rhaegar would allow the North to be independent. So I think that is the kind of the slightly nuanced view I have, is that yes, he wouldn't want to do away with the possible Baratheon link, but at the same time, I don't think, particularly if this came from the Maesters, which was the hint that we got, that this was, I don't think he would particularly be wanting to extend Targaryen rule over the Seven Kingdoms. But yeah, it's a fascinating question because we do not know huge amounts about the motivations here. We just see what happened as a result of these Southron ambitions, which was establishing a series of alliances across the north half of the Seven Kingdoms. Lady Tia, thank you so much, saying for the super chat, saying this is one of my favorite subjects. So thank you both. Looking forward to watching this later. Good to have you back, Robert. Thank you. It's good to be back. Just picking up on, so DD in the chat says they were not married. This was something I noticed that you were quite strong on, saying that they were married. There was one sentence in the Maester's diary that mentioned both the marriage and divorce. This is in the show when Sam and Gilly found this. The diary also kept a record of his bowel movements. What is it that makes you think that they were actually married?
Well, it comes down to the Tower of Joy. So there's two main things, and it's first address the Tower of Joy, because that's the one that has been with us for the longest, since Game of Thrones. We see 3 Kings Guard guarding Lyanna. The words that they use when Ned remembers their confrontation in his dream are very strongly indicative that they are aware that Rhaegar is dead, that Aegon is dead, and Aerys is dead, and Viserys is alive. And yet, here they are, insisting that they are the King's Guard. They stress that word. We are the King's Guard. We do not flee. Our knees do not bend. They're, it seems to me, using hidden words, or very plain words, but sort of cloaking their meaning, that the new king is in the tower at their back. They're guarding him. Ned says, "Why didn't you go off with Viserys?" And they say, "Well, we don't. The King's Guard doesn't flee because they're guarding the king. He's behind them in the tower." So to me, that's always been the implication there. And people have argued about that for years. There have been some really amazing analyses of that whole scene with the King's Guard, the Tower of Joy. There are other things in the text, but to me, more recently, in Fire and Blood, we learn about this little thing called the doctrine of exceptionalism, which is something that Jaehaerys the First had pretty much installed into the faith, specifically for Targaryens, in order to kind of make it plain that Targaryens could continue to practice their incestuous marriages. He didn't want to have a replay of what had happened with Maegor's polygamy and his brother and sister's incestuous marriage with the faith that had caused so much trouble. So he had this doctrine of exceptionalism written and became one of the tenets of the faith. It mirrors something in real life called the concept of divine right that medieval kings used. That was, something they used to say that they were above common men. They got their sort of rights directly from God. That doctrine of exceptionalism, assuming it's still part of the faith, and we have no reason to think it wasn't, because Aerys was married to his own sister Rhaella, would it have allowed Rhaegar to have a polygamous marriage? So, between why were we given this thing? Why were we given all the indicators of polygamy? The fact that Targaryens practiced polygamy in the past. I think I've always been on the side of no, there wasn't an annulment for Elia, and that's how we square that. That it wasn't necessarily this huge insult and casting her off, but rather Rhaegar bringing back Targaryen polygamy, which had not been around for a couple of centuries at that point, and just using that as a way for him to get what he thought he needed to get, which was a third child, which he knew he couldn't get from his first wife after, the maesters told her she couldn't have more children after the second child. So, it's just a kind of a combination of many things that have, without even looking at the show, that just strictly from the books, that I think are strong indicators that there was a marriage. So.
Yeah, I don't think there's much I can add to that, to be honest. That was really, really interesting. I think that my own angle on this is that we view Elia Martell through the lens of the people who describe her, rather than through the lens of who she probably was. And by that, what I mean is that we get people like Cersei, who kind of viewed her as weak. We get Barristan Selmy, who wasn't a big fan. She grew up as a princess of Dawn. She grew up in a very egalitarian society. She grew up in a society that was very accepting of sort of polyamorous relationships. She looked up to Oberyn, who had lots of relationships all over the place, lots of different children all over the place. The clear implication was that she was actually fine with the idea that people had multiple relationships. So the idea that Rhaegar actually went off and got another woman, to use a slightly crude phrase, I think that she was probably okay with that. I suspect that they talked about this a lot. She would have been very aware that he wanted a third child, and it would have killed her, literally, to have a third child. So I think she was more accepting of this than we have been told, because we have only ever been told her story through the eyes of people who weren't big fans of her. Mm-hmm. So that's my general take on what was going on there. We had sorry, did you want to add to that?
No, I was just going to say I agree with you. I mean, we don't see that much. We don't see really anything that's sort of out of the ordinary with Elia after the tourney of Harrenhal, and even after Lyanna gets taken away. Everything that she's doing that we see seems to be rather normal. She goes and has her baby. We know she has a discussion about prophecy with her husband. She goes back to King's Landing with her children and presumably sees him after he returns out of the south and before he goes off to the Trident. So, yeah, I think that we don't have enough information to form a real strong opinion, but I would agree that she was probably okay with it. She was a strong person who had a lot of agency, and I don't think I don't think we should just assume that she was an insipid little weakling, which I think is what Cersei calls her.
Well, pretty much. And I think that there is clearly no evidence that she was against it, is the other thing. Is that so we get reports from Jaime about what happened when Rhaegar came back, and there was no hint that there was any kind of break in the relationship between Rhaegar and Elia. No. We get nothing about that. We have had a couple of super chats that I just want to quickly pick up on. Tormund Redmayne, thank you very much, says, when Howland Reed surfaces, I love a Howland Reed question, when Howland Reed surfaces, what information do you think he will reveal, and what parts of his plan would he keep secret, specifically about his connection to the children and Bloodraven? So this, I think, is very much a book question. George R. Martin has been very clear. We will meet Howland Reed again. He is going to emerge. My take is that he is going to be, whereas on the show, this was very much Bran and Sam who are kind of revealing the backstory about what was going on. I think that Howland Reed is going to be the person in the books who, maybe Bran and Sam will have some input, but he is going to be the person who's going to reveal what happened at the Tower of Joy. So that's there. In terms of what about his connection with the Children of the Forest and Bloodraven, I suspect that the Bloodraven link will be left for us to figure out. The Children of the Forest one, I think that we've already had the hint that he went to the Isle of Faces. He was there for a year, which is a long time. He did plug into the Weirwood network, so I think that it's going to be very clear that what he did was immediately following that contact, and therefore it's going to be very clear that his role in everything that happened from the turning of Harrenhal all the way through to the Tower of Joy was in line with what the Weirwood network was wanting in some way. But what's your take on Howland Reed? What do you think we're going to get from him when we do encounter him in the books?
Oh yeah, plenty of revelation information. He was there. He was there for most of it. He was there at the tourney. He was there at the Tower of Joy, and I also agree that he's going to be a very large part of any kind of reveal. I kind of favor, in George's style, I think we'll get kind of a staggered reveal. We'll get little bits, different pieces of information from different sources. The way we've been kind of doing all along, we'll have to assemble it together rather like a puzzle, but he has the key pieces, doesn't he? He's the survivor from the Tower of Joy. He knows what happened there. So, and yeah, as far as the Children of the Forest and the Isle of Faces, George has said that the Green Men will come to the fore in the future. So I do think, we are going to find out what went on there, and probably what his relationship with them was, and what impact that had on his actions following his interaction with them.
Yeah, and I think that don't quote me on it, but I love the foreshadowing that, as I see it, foreshadowing in Fire and Blood about a dragon battle above the God's Eye Lake, above the Isle of Faces. I think that we're going to see that the Isle of Faces is a lot more important. The God's Eye is a lot more important in the books than it was on the show. And whereas I think Winterfell is important, and there will definitely be some kind of battle there, I think that the denouement of the others' journey and the struggle against them will probably happen at the Isle of Faces, where the pact happened originally, rather than up at Winterfell. So that's my general view of what's going to go on there. I think that there's they stuck in the show. They stuck to the areas and the places that they'd been to before, rather than trying to introduce new places and characters. That they simplified it. I think we're going to see the Green Men and the Isle of Faces and Howland Reed really come to the fore in the next two books.
Yeah, truth. And one of the things that I think we talked about on History of Westeros when we were doing show reviews right at the end of the season was the possibility that Harrenhal plays a big role, because look at Harrenhal has played a huge role, and it's right there. It's played a huge role in just about every major historical event, that we know about in Westerosi history, in sort of like the historical era. So it makes sense that that's where, kind of like you said, the denouement happens in that area. Where else would you go if you had to draw in huge numbers of people into a single place, to sort of like make a last stand or something? Harrenhal is the only castle in the realm that is big enough to absorb, and it's made clear to us over and over again that that's the case. So.
And if you want to have a great council like they had on the show, then actually the best place to have it probably would be Harrenhal, as we had the great council that happened there before. So yeah, it all kind of adds up to that being the focus of things rather than Winterfell and King's Landing, which will be important. But I think that the sort of the thematic end will be there at the center of the Inn at the Crossroads and the Isle of Faces and Harrenhal, which are all within a few miles of each other in the center of Westeros. Steph Snow, just following up, I think, from the earlier super chat, talking about licking the wounds from season 8, saying, I agree, my heart just broke for Jon and his lack of impact. Dany may flip, but she also broke my heart. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it left me sad. I wanted Rhaegar and Lyanna to have sacrificed themselves something more. Yeah, I get that, and I think so. The Rhaegar and Lyanna thing is that I don't think either of them sacrificed themselves. It sounds slightly harsh, but Rhaegar never thought that he was going to sacrifice himself. Rhaegar was convinced that he was going to win that battle. He was absolutely certain of it. He was going to defeat the rebellion, and then he was going to go on and rule. That was what he was about. Lyanna didn't think that she was going to sacrifice herself because she just caught a fever post-birth. There are always like people who know medical stuff better than I am, but this is not unknown in medieval times, post-birth fevers, and she died. That it wasn't a sacrifice in some ways. So it is very much in the kind of George R. R. Martin vein that there are deaths that actually don't mean stuff. So that's kind of, it's harsh and it's bleak, and yes, your heart kind of breaks, but I think that's the story we're being told. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do. I think you hit it spot on. I'm pretty sure when I talked about Rhaegar in our Lyanna episode, definitely not intending to die. And obviously, Lyanna, young girl that she was, surely didn't expect to die. I mean, women have babies all the time, right? I mean, but they also, in that setting, they also die all the time, but it's not something that you could predict, or there's nothing noble about it. It's just a tragic thing that happened for no real reason. Rhaegar's death, maybe he should have made more plans for his death, or we don't know what plans he may have laid. But yeah, I don't think they were noble sacrifices in either case, sadly. And I think, like you said, that is very Martinian.
Martinian, great. I'm going to use that from now on. Steph Snow, thank you so much. A couple of extra sort of follow-up super chats saying, any chance in the books we will have a Jon and Dany baby? I wanted one, pet as it seems. All that secrecy and pain needs something. So I mean, my take on this is that no, is the short answer. I think that season 7 kind of built it up as an idea that there might be a Jon and Dany baby, but I think it was always going to be that the timeline was always going to be against it, and I think that that's going to be the same in the books. That Dany, I could see her becoming pregnant, possibly. There are hints in A Dance with Dragons, the last chapter, that perhaps she can have children again. But and I think that she will get together with Jon in the books as well. But the timing, I think, is not there for them to have a child and settle down and be happy families or anything like that. I would love it to be the case, but I think that as blunt and heartbreaking as it is, I think Jon will kill Dany in the books as well. It's possible that he will kill her while she's pregnant and he doesn't know it, to add extra Martinian tragedy onto the top. But that I can't see them having a baby together. That's not really where I see it going. And I've had that view for a few years now. I'd be interested to know, and I said I'm not alone in this, but I'd be interested to know where you're at on that one.
Yeah, pretty much in agreement. I've thought for a long time that Jon is going to kill Dany. I mean, read his arc closely, and you'll see there are plenty of hints of him having to make this kind of tragic decision. And as far as her having a child, I would agree that the timeline probably speaks against it, but I've also had an odd feeling that he could kill her while she's pregnant. I mean, it's something that's definitely crossed my mind. I like I don't really, I can't say that I like any of it, but I like the idea that if that was the case, that he would do it unknowingly, that you might say have realized it in her point of view, and then the action is taken and he doesn't even know that that's what's going on. But in the long run, I don't see how. I definitely think Dance with Dragons is implying that yes, she can have children, she's fertile, just this and that this Mirri Maz Duur was very possibly just playing with her head all along. I don't know that that prophecy was ever a real thing, or if something has just changed. But I just don't see how the timeline fits in with them actually getting to meet and then have a baby, get to that point in a relationship, have a baby, and still get to the ending that we know is ultimately going to come. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a general rule with George R. R. Martin is you try and work out what is the most tragic thing that could happen to any character, and that's probably what's going to happen. Yeah, I think I would agree. Let's move on to perhaps slightly less tragic territory with Ariel Winchester. Thank you so much for the super chat saying, do you think that more than Ned, Benjen, and Howland knew the truth about Jon's parentage? So just to sort of pick up from my perspective, so in terms of knowing about Jon's perspective, this is who's there at the Tower of Joy, or who knew before then about the two of them. So my take is that yes, Benjen knew. I think that he was close to Lyanna. Whether he knew that she had a child, probably not, but I think that they were in close contact, and I think that he knew that her and Rhaegar were a thing in some way. Ned obviously discovered when he went there. Howland was the other person to emerge alive from the Tower of Joy. The question is there anyone else? I will go with they probably let Ashara Dane into this. I'm a big subscriber into the idea of H plus A equals M. Howland and Ashara Dane got together. That's my general take, but I don't think it's much wider than that. In line with my even doubt blame Bloodraven, I think the Weirwood Network knew too, so you can say add Bloodraven to it. But is there anyone else you think you've missed off of that list?
Not specifically that would know about R plus L equals J, but there are some people who might know details kind of from the other side of it, like what happened at the crossroads. You know, there may be witnesses who still survive to that might reveal how that went down. You know, if when Rhaegar found Lyanna in the Riverlands, what really happened. We know that he had 6 companions with him, and we know that 5 of them are dead, and one of them we don't know if he's dead or alive. And I have a theory that he is still very much alive in the Riverlands and might be coming back to kind of reveal some bit of what he witnessed to us. That kind of reveal from many angles, sort of thing.
And this is one of the other theories that I love of Lady Gwyn's, which is that it is like of the nerdiest of the nerdy, if you don't mind me saying. It's just the kind of thing that I love, that is a detail that most people entirely not show thing. But tell me a little bit, high level, Lem Lemoncloak, what's going on?
All right. Well, Lemoncloak, you know, he wears this strange yellow cloak. It's very distinctive. Seems like it might be a little out of place with someone who's just this kind of common man of the Riverlands. So I once started wondering what, this is years and years ago, if he was someone, who could he be? And my mind, for some reason, settled on Richard Lonmouth, who was one of Rhaegar's squires. Well, I'll tell you, the reason is the arms of House Lonmouth are yellow, and skulls and kisses on a yellow field. So I looked at Lemoncloak, and we got the yellow cloak. He's heavily associated with both skulls and bones, and also with kisses. The ghost of Highheart repeatedly asks him for kisses. So that's the pretty high level, how did we get there? There's more kind of to it, little hints and things that might indicate that he's more than he seems. But yeah, one of my favorite crackpots right there is that Lemoncloak is Rhaegar Squire Richard Lonmouth. And if he is, you see, these kind of crackpots, in my opinion, always have to have a purpose. You can't just, if you have a crackpot and it just doesn't go anywhere, I don't think it's necessarily something that George would run with, because he has reasons when he writes things, or everything he lays out is very well thought out. So what would be the purpose of this? Well, what I started out saying, that Richard Lonmouth was most likely with Rhaegar when he came across Lyanna in the Riverlands and either kidnapped her or eloped with her or rescued her, or whatever happened that we don't really know. He could be the one that finally reveals to us what truly happened there. And I honestly, other than some other mysterious kind of witness that has yet to be revealed, I can't think of another person that would ever tell us the truth of that, because all the other people that were there, confirmed there, are also confirmed dead. So
and I have to say, I love this theory because it is very niche, but also it works perfectly. And in the world of Ice and Fire, we find out that when Rhaegar set off, he went with half a dozen of his closest companions, and the first thing we have to ask is, who are they? And we assume that one of them is Arthur Dayne, and we assume that one of them is Oswald Went, because they both ended up with him at the Tower of Joy. I suspect that one of them was a Shara Dayne, simply because if you're going to go and pick up Lyanna Stark, then do you go there just with a bunch of guys in armor with big swords, or do you go there with somebody who's a woman who she's already met? I think I would do that. So that kind of makes sense. But even that still leaves 3 people isn't half a dozen. There must be others. And so you have to say, who are the others? And Rhaegar's squires seem to make sense, the kind of people who would be coming along with him. So this works for me, and it works for me, the idea, but they then kind of disappear. We don't hear about them again. And this mysterious character who's there with the Brotherhood without banners, it kind of makes sense. So I like this theory a lot. I'm gonna just very quickly, Megan V, thank you. My hair is like it is because it is sweaty and hot, very hot here. Jamie McKenna saying, look forward to more vids in your Rhaegar and Lyanna series. When can we expect the next installment? Probably in a couple of weeks. My next video in this series is going to be along the lines of what happened in the second half of the Tower of Joy. I took my last videos about what happened with the battle and all the rest of it, and with Arthur Dayne. My second one is based on a whole series of questions. This is how I often start writing my videos, a whole series of questions like, why is it that Ned dreams about broken promises if his promise was to look after Jon, which he seems to have done? What did he actually promise Lyanna? Because he seems to have promised her at least a couple of things. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, I've mentioned it before, but it's been the nagging thing for me. Why did Ned leave those bodies of his bannermen down south? Because it's raised again when we get Barbary Dustin. She clearly raises the issue of why on earth didn't the body come back up north. There must be a reason why Ned left them there, why he didn't send someone down afterwards to go and collect the bodies and all the rest of it. There are a number of questions. Did he really bring down the tower, break it down and use the stones? There's a lot of questions there in the kind of the second half of the Tower of Joy that I'm going to be addressing in my next video on that. As I say, probably a couple of weeks' time. In terms of the Traveler's Guide, I'm going to be, my next video is tomorrow. I'm getting back into the groove of doing Traveler's Guide every Friday, Well Told Tale every Wednesday. For those who don't know, the Well Told Tale is my other channel where I do audio narrations of what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. We've just started at the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. So if you're interested in that, go and check out my second channel, The Well Told Tale. But Lady Gwyn, what's going on with you, with your channel? Is there anything you particularly liked, or not just your channel, your podcast, wherever you are on the internet? What is it that people could be looking out for?
Well, right, we just actually today released a new podcast episode, which you can find on our YouTube channel. So if you're here on YouTube, obviously, skip on over and check that out. Subscribe to our channel. It's all about the Will prologue from A Game of Thrones. So we've really gone right back to the beginning. It's the first time we've done a regular episode that's all about a single chapter, and it was really great fun analyzing the characters, the others, the Night's Watch, and the themes, my word, the themes of death and fear, and how they are introduced full throttle in that chapter and then continue throughout the whole series. We talk about the role of prologues in epic fantasy, and it was a really fun episode to make. So there's that. And like I said, we just did a Lyanna episode. That's out there too. And what's coming next is we're working our way towards doing what we're calling our Winds of Winter primer. So we're going to do a several parts episode, episodes that it's going to basically recap where everybody left off at the end of Feast and Dance, because I'm sure we've all forgotten, if we haven't been constantly rereading. There might be threads that we need to pick up again. So we'll recap all the character arcs and all the kind of theories and kind of make some predictions about where things are going. So that's later this year.
And as I'm as excited as everyone else is, I have long held to the hope that it's going to be November. I'm now starting to worry it's not going to be November. Please reassure me. When is the Winds of Winter coming out?
I would love for it to be in time for the holidays. As I was a bookseller for a long time, and I could tell you that the big, I mean, I'm not going to, a publisher in possession of the Winds of Winter is not going to hold back to hit one of these times. But the best times to release a book are pretty much the beginning of summer, October, and then immediately after the holidays, because this is a very commercial thing, but everybody gets gift cards and has money to spend. So you do see kind of like a flush of new books that come out right after the holidays in American bookstores anyways. So hope is not lost. We could see a January release. That wouldn't be out of the question. I think that once George is done with it, we'll get it 3 months later, no matter what time of year it is, to be honest. Basically, at this moment, all I can say is sounds like he's pretty sure we'll have it before next summer. So,
yeah. I mean, it's speculation, and I just like trying to grab any straws I can. I'm now heading towards the idea that maybe it's like spring next year for the paperback, softback, and then maybe because they can control it, maybe the hardback comes out in October, November of next year. Sorry, the other way around. Sorry, there's a hardback first, and then the softback or paperback around sort of October, November next year. But I think we're nearly there.
I do too. I mean, I think we're in the home stretch for sure. Other than George's brief comments about having the book before Worldcon 2020. I don't think that any of us really have any super insight, but I have a feeling it'll be the next 6 months or so. I mean, he's got to feel confident enough to say something like that.
So. I think so. I think so. Okay, let's get away from this because I could get too excited. We had a couple of super chats. Tormund Redmayne, thank you so much again, saying, do you think Howland Reed's objective is to help the children win the war against the Andals while honouring their pact with the First Men, leaving the children as the winner of the Game of Thrones? Well, I'll throw that one to you. I'm sure I'll have thoughts on this one as well. Do you think Howland Reed is there to win the war against the Andals?
I don't necessarily think it's going to come down to Andals versus First Men, simply because outside of the North, it's actually very hard to disentangle Andals and First Men, because there's been so much intermarriage. I mean, look at the Riverlands, where you have houses that are clearly have First Men traditions, but they've obviously intermarried with Andal houses, and that probably holds true in all the other regions. I think Howland's objective is probably kind of yet to be revealed. I mean, it's definitely connected with Children of the Forest. I don't really know exactly what their objective is, though.
I mean, yeah, I think I would agree. My general take, people who watch this channel a lot will know, my general take is that this is a story of two opposing forces, ice and fire, both of which could destroy the world. And so the end of the story is that both ice and fire have to be dealt with in some way, removed from the equation, whether that's destroyed or pushed back or whatever. They have to be eliminated. We saw that happen on the show, that ice got defeated and fire, Drogon, flew away. So Westeros did not have these two forces anymore. And I think that is where the Weirwood Network are wanting to be, because they want the continent, the world, to be at peace with itself. The trees want to grow and nurture and all the good stuff, and that cannot happen if either ice or fire is in charge. So I think that they want to push back against the army of the dead for obvious reasons, but also let's not forget that the first enemy of wood is fire. So they also will not be a big fan of dragons and Targaryens and all the rest of it. So Bran ending up on the throne kind of fits with that as a kind of a, they want to actually manage things, not just hide away in the corners anymore. So that's where I'm thinking they're going. Whether it goes towards this Bran on the throne thing or not, we have to accept the fact that the Children of the Forest and Howland as an operative of the Weirwood network, they are trying to protect the continent against these twin threats. So that's where I would take that, I have to say. I think I had I think I saw Amanda Disputed Lands in here a moment ago. So Disputed Lands, Amanda saying, "Hey Robert, it was great to meet you at the con. It was fantastic to meet you too, Amanda. Just disappointed I didn't get to have a battle with you with the foam swords and shields. But thanks for the great R plus L equals J / Tower of Joy content." Also, Lady Gwyn is such a great guest to have on. She is, isn't she? I feel honoured to say. Then we have Vampirist99 saying, Lady Gwyn, didn't you have a theory about Baelish being at the Crossroads Inn and telling Brandon that Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna? I mean, I certainly had a theory about that. I don't know whether you also did. Did you have a theory about it?
A long, long time ago, but then George actually shut it down.
Oh, tell me.
Somewhere out there, and this goes back into, I don't know, probably 6 years ago. So I couldn't dig up the comment from whatever interview it appeared in, but he did apparently say, somebody posed that question to him, and his response was something along the lines of, Peter Baelish was just a kid. He had been nearly killed by Brandon in that duel they had, and he's not responsible for everything. So it's a good kind of, I used to call it, sort of like the chaos theory that even before the show picked up on that theme with him, that he was just out there creating chaos all along. But sadly, I don't think we can hang this one on him.
I mean, I still like it.
I do too.
I would have to read the detail of what he said there, but yeah. I mean, my general take is that yes, obviously he was just a kid. Obviously, he'd be beaten up by Brandon Stark, and he was heading home. My take is that that's when the full spring ended, and when winter comes, then the passes into the Vale get shut down. So where would he have got to? The inn at the Crossroads. So my take is that logically, according to what we know, he would have been there. After that, it kind of gets into kind of logical speculation, but Brandon went off on a mission. We don't know what, but the only thing we know that he got excited about was Littlefinger and what happened with both of the sisters, to be honest. So it makes sense that he went after him. And that seems to have happened at the same time as what we probably both agree was the abduction / meeting / rescue / whatever it was at the Inn of the Crossroads. So I think at the very least he was there at that sort of time when it happened, and something made him gave him the idea that chaos was a ladder, and all you have to do is just create chaos. And something gave Brandon the idea that Lyanna had been abducted, because he clearly had that idea in his head. So if it wasn't Littlefinger saying something, then somebody else there did.
Yeah, which is something that I've talked about. If you put this scenario kind of in an inn, so imagine you've got a young noblewoman, and that's the people who are maybe at the inn. Imagine the scene with Tyrion and Catelyn. People didn't really know who Cat was. She was there kind of being quiet, keeping to herself, right? But if you put Lyanna in that same situation, you've got a young woman at an inn, and then a bunch of guys, whether it was Rhaegar coming to kidnap her, or whether it was a bunch of people coming to, soldiers coming to take her back to Ares, and then Rhaegar coming to rescue her. If you're sitting enjoying your pint of ale at the inn, and all this stuff starts happening, and you see this young woman and a bunch of guys with swords, and you see the prince, he's going to be very recognizable, right? Prince Rhaegar, he's got silver hair, he looks like a Targaryen, with his sword bared. Now, is he actually kidnapping her? Is he protecting her from other soldiers? We don't really know the truth of it, but you're just a peasant in an inn, and you see this happen, and then he takes her, and they ride off together. So when her brother shows up, what are you going to say? Prince Rhaegar took her at sword point, dragged her away. So it's a classic case, I think, of kind of, people not really understanding what they're seeing. And that we see this over and over again in the series, that, stories get told and they grow in the telling. But maybe all the details aren't really there. So whether it was someone like Peter Baelish, because even if he was there witnessing this, he probably wouldn't have known what was really happening, would he? He would have just been a witness like anyone else.
I mean, and my take on it is that if Brandon caught up with him, as he probably would have done, because Peter Baelish was injured and moving slowly and all the rest of it, then if he cornered him, if he was there, if you picture Ned pushing Littlefinger up against a wall, it's the same kind of thing. What would Littlefinger say in order to try and get rid of this threat to himself? He would say, hey, you'll never guess what. I just saw your sister get kidnapped.
Yeah.
That's, for me, that kind of works with his character and with what happened next. But yeah, so I think the building blocks are clearly there. We know that a bunch of guys came and went away with Lyanna, and it would have looked like some sort of abduction. We're pretty clear it was at the inn of the crossroads. It's likely that Littlefinger was there. We don't have the silver bullet that says that he was the person who said something to Brandon, but we do know that Brandon emerged from that convinced that his sister had been abducted. So that's where we're at, and I like the idea that it was Littlefinger, because it for me is a starting point for his kind of characterization as this kind of person who wants to create chaos in order to then profit from it, which he did. He profited from all of the chaos, and he ended up being in charge of customs down at Gulltown, which made him rich. So he did benefit from all of this. Stephen Lucy, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, hi Robert, first time I've managed to catch a stream, just a super chat to thank you for all the great content both here and on the Well Told Tale. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Just going back to my patrons, for those who don't know, I always go before every live stream, I always ask my patrons over on Patreon if they've got any questions, and I use them as kind of a frame for what we're going to be going through for each of these live streams. We had Leathery Wings saying, It seems clear that Rhaegar left Elia so he could father a daughter to fulfill prophecy. Do you think he chose Lyanna out of any notion of romantic love, or do you believe that he chose her for practical reasons? We kind of touched on this at the start, but if I could just get you to unpack it a little bit more, do you think that there was love there, or do you think that this was a when to start with, when he went to collect her, was it because he was in love with her, or was it because he wanted this third child?
Well, I think he was interested by her. I think he was impressed. So we go back to the Turdy Harrenhal, Night of the Laughing Tree. I think that what likely happened is Rhaegar discovered that Lyanna was the Knight of the Laughing Tree, and that is the reason why he crowned her as Queen of Love and Beauty at the tourney, as a way, as he would have seen it, that was a way of honoring her. Because remember, when Bran hears the story, he says to Mira that the Mystery Knight should have won the tourney. Well, Rhaegar is very much like Bran. He loves story. He's a kind of a romantic and lover of stories and histories. And I think you could make a case that he would have seen it the same way, and that his giving her that crown might have been his way of saying, "Yeah, you deserve to win this tourney because you did something very honorable by defeating those three knights." And I think he would have admired her for that, for her courage. I also think Rhaegar, could be probably a little impractical, and I'm sure he didn't expect the reaction that came out of him crowning her, both from her family and his father, who were all rather upset. But I think that was probably the origin of, some sort of tender feelings between them. We know that she liked listening to him sing, so she probably had some sort of crush on him. And then, he seems to have gone back to his normal life and gone back to Dragonstone to have a baby with his wife. And I think it was only after she had the baby and was told she couldn't have any more, and then he had this vision of Dany, which is this kind of weird two-way vision, it seems like, from the House of the Undying. She sees him, but he also sees her looking at him, and that seems to be what convinces him that he needs to have a third child. He's seeing his sister, but I think he's thinking he's seeing a vision of a daughter. And so he comes up with this, this is what I have to do. And so prophecy then starts to drive him. And I think he would have realized somewhere along the lines that aspect of the prophecy where he looks at the baby and says, "His is the song of ice and fire." And he's talking about Aegon, but that really reveals that there's some part of this prophecy that he's adhering to that talks about this song of ice and fire. And it's the only time it's mentioned in the books. Well, Jorah mentions it, but he's mentioning it again in reference to this vision. But in, we learn from the tales of the Dance of the Dragons that there was this pact of ice and fire between Starks and Targaryens during the Dance of the Dragons. And Rhaegar may have realized that at some point that ice and fire signifies a union between Stark and Targaryen. So something may have clicked for him. And so I think what I'm saying in a very long-winded way is that you're dealing with kind of two different things: a romantic spark, and then sort of this more pragmatic, realizing how well she fits into all the things that are driving him. And then you may have even had yet another spark where he had to dash off and save her life, which kind of really drove them together. So
I think I love all of that. Thank you. That's brilliant. I particularly love the vision bit with Dany in the House of the Undying. I sort of mentioned it from her perspective a few times. Is that But I agree completely. When Rhaegar was there, I think he saw her. Dany seems to think that he saw her, and I think that you're completely right. I think that he thought he saw a female Targaryen and thought, this is a daughter. This is what my final child is going to grow up to be like. And I think that is when he's saying, no, must be one more, and sees this vision. I think that's what's going on there. I think my tweak on the sort of the ending bit there is that I think that there's a very real possibility that when he kept on going back to Summerhall, we hear that he kept on going back to Summerhall, that was meeting the Woods Witch, the ghost of High Heart, who was still there. And I think she was giving him this kind of prophecy. And I think that's where he got his final prophetic push from. And when we read about Rhaegar and his companions setting off on a journey which ends up in the Riverlands, which seems to imply they must go somewhere first. They could quite easily have sort of like gone from Dragonstone, got a boat, and then gone pretty much straight into the Riverlands, but they said they ended in the Riverlands. I think that was because they went to Summerhall first. I think that Rhaegar got some kind of re-up on his prophecy in some way from the Ghost of High Heart, the Woods Witch who was there, who was gorging on her pain, we hear, so we think that she was probably there for quite some time. And I think that was what then pushed him to go up and get Lyanna. I think you're entirely right that there was some connection from Harrenhal. I think it's entirely likely that they kept up some kind of correspondence. I think that Lyanna probably stayed at Harrenhal with the Wents. There's the long and slightly convoluted reasoning for this, but I suspect that she probably did stay there after the tourney at Harrenhal. And I think that would have been a safe place for her to be having some correspondence with him. So yeah, I think there was a spark, a connection, whatever it was at Harrenhal. I think that Rhaegar did decide, having discovered that his wife couldn't have a third child, and then had a vision of what he thought was his third child. He then went to Harrenhal. Not Harrenhal, went to Summerhall, got the extra bit of prophecy which pushed him up to Harrenhal. So that's my take anyway. Okay. Yeah, I think we're in complete agreement on that one. So
I think so
happy
too.
Let me just double check whether we have had any super chats. I don't think I missed any on the way. So let's just quickly dip into something else from my patrons. Morally, you are asking about who knew of the relationship. I think we covered that one already. Lady Tia was saying everything that happened preceding the rebellion, Robert's rebellion, and after, which was more prominent? Was Rhaegar simply daft or naive, or was he just unlucky? So, what do you reckon? Was he was he just unlucky, losing? Was he naive? Because he was killed and he didn't think he was going to be killed. So what was going on?
I think a little bit of the latter too. I think he was naive. I mean, I think case in point is the tourney at Harrenhal. Giving this crown of love and beauty to Lyanna Stark, obviously showed that he didn't think that through. I mean, he didn't realize the implications that would have with not only his paranoid father, but also, kind of the men in her life that might be insulted by this. Although I would point out that the World Book assumes a lot of emotions and reactions on the parts of Lyanna's family that aren't actually, it's sort of like puts you in their heads in a way that the author probably wasn't. So there's a lot of assumption going on. But that said, some of them were clearly offended. Wasn't necessarily a good move. So I think he's naive. I think he's just kind of a dreamy soul. And I think he was unlucky. I think, there's every reason to believe that he could have prevailed at the Trident. Robert wasn't. It's not like Robert Baratheon was, Gregor Clegane. He was Rhaegar was a fine fighter. He had defeated people in tourneys, although war isn't a tourney. I think we're cautioned about that in the series. But their armies were of relatively equal size, and he wasn't destined to lose, is what I'm saying. So I think it was a kind of a bad luck and a little bit of naivete about some of the forces he was dealing with, and which he admits as much to Jaime. I think that he made mistakes and that he should have handled some of these things differently and made changes long before the point that they had gotten to.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of the rebellion itself, the Targaryens corporately made huge amounts of mistakes, and they could have cut this off very soon, early on, by getting rid of Robert Baratheon in the south and his army. And they just did not do this. And so Rhaegar basically just hid for the first year of the war, along with a couple of the best fighters they had.
Yeah.
We never saw Arthur Dayne in action, who would probably have swung a couple of battles. Yes, that will have had an impact, but it was more a kind of a strategic thing. Is that if you look at how the war went, you have Ned went up north to collect his army and came down south. That took a huge amount of time. Robert Baratheon had his army, which was working its way all the way across the south and then trying to get up north to join up forces. And that was the time to defeat Robert Baratheon when he was separated. Nearly happened at the Battle of the Bells, but didn't quite. If they had got it right, then somewhere around the time when they faced the Tyrell army would probably have worked. But we're getting into sort of pretend military history at this point. But yeah, I think it was it was a little bit of naivety, as you say, and I think that there was also, for the Targaryens as a whole, they did not take the rebellion seriously until it was too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ali I always get this wrong. Al-Muhanna says, do you think we will get to meet these characters in the book, Rhaegar and Lyanna, in flashbacks or even a prologue? I mean, my take is probably not from their perspective, but I think that we will hear about them a few more times. We do, in the books, we do get to see them very briefly. We get to see Lyanna through Ned's memories. We get to see Rhaegar through Jaime's memories and also Jaime's weirwood vision. So we get little hints of them. I don't think we're going to see a point of view chapter from them. But would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I think what we'll see is, we saw Bran seeing young Lyanna through the weirwood tree. I think that he'll probably see more along those lines, something to do with what happened, and then we'll see it through people's memories, and that's why it's always been important to me to think about who was alive and might have, borne witness to any particular aspect of this. Like we take people like Howland Reed or potential Richard Lonmouth, or if there was a was there some sort of a septon that married them, or was there, did they go to the Isle of Faces and meet the children of the forest there, and then you could see them through a weirwood tree. There's all these ideas, because I think the only way we're ever going to see them is through dreams, flashbacks, visions. That's how the reveal will happen.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. So Morally asking about Elia Martell's role. I think we've covered that one off. That you were also asking about Bloodraven, whether he played an active or passive role in Rhaegar and Lyanna's history. So my take on this one is that Bloodraven we have to view him as part of the Weirwood network to all intents and purposes. Yes, he's got a separate identity, but he is plugged into it, and that he's becoming more and more part of it. And he will have been the person effectively who's been in contact with Howland. I'm going to do a whole video on the Bloodraven and Howland Reed's involvement in the rebellion and the turning at Harrenhal and the Tower of Joy and all the rest of it. But I would say that he is the person who kind of drove Howland Reed's role in this. Howland Reed was their man on the ground, so to speak. And I think Bloodraven, the Weirwood network as a whole, were the people who are running things at a kind of like slightly higher, slightly more meta level. I'd be interested in your view on this one. I'm a huge subscriber in the If in Doubt Blame Bloodraven. Do you think that he was controlling things during this time?
Yeah, I mean, controlling, or I might use the word directing, which is slightly more passive. You know, it's not entirely passive, but just I think he may have had some in some sort of impact, and control may have been as something as simple as showing visions of things to someone to influence their decision making. Yes, I think, you know, I like your thinking, because kind of along the lines of thinking about who could have borne witness. As far as the Weirwood network goes, you always have to think about who was around a weirwood tree, and, you know, where did these things, you know, where things are taking place. So locale matters, as well as, you know, the people who are there. And definitely whenever we see a prominent interaction around weirwood trees, you know, your little red flag should be going off. And I am quite sure, as far as the follow-up part of her question, is does he know about Jon's true parentage? I think he wouldn't be worth his salt as a part of the Weirwood network if he didn't. So I'm pretty sure he does. At the very least, that's a firm yes. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to take all of that as being you're a subscriber of If in Doubt Blame Bloodraven, which
yes.
is yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, we've got 10, maybe 15 minutes to go, guys. So I think I've got a couple more questions from my patrons, and I think I can see a couple more super chats. So we will go with them. But now is the time to drop any final questions in if you have them. Tormund Redmayne, thank you so much again, saying, what do you think Benjen's fate will be? And will he play a role in the reveal of RLJ? So my take is that Benjen in the books has headed north and not returned, but I think he clearly knew what Jon's parentage was. I think that is clear from sort of the hints about what happened back in the day, and also when he's there, and they showed it quite well in the books with the you don't know what you're giving up kind of stuff. So I think he does know. I think he's gone north of the wall. I think we will see him again, probably not in the exact same way that he appears on the show, but I suspect that he will meet Jon or Bran north of the wall, and have some kind of connection with them. I suspect that he will. The reason he hasn't come south is probably quite similar, because he can't for some magical reason. But what do you think in terms of Benjen? Do you think what do you think is going to happen with him?
Well, I think he's going to come back. I think that's for sure. I think he knows the truth, and yeah, he's definitely not going to be the way in which he came back in the show, because in that case they seem to be merging the character of Cold Hands with whatever is happening with Benjen. Although the way he came back kind of at the end of the series, that it could be more something like that, where he's just kind of comes out of nowhere and does something heroic. I don't know. It's hard to say what someone has been doing for 3 years in the frozen north beyond the wall. So, but I'm pretty certain that he's one of the few people that knows the truth. And like you were saying, there's quite a bit of hints if you look at it sort of retrospectively. I'm rereading a Game of Thrones right now. Having just done the prologue chapter, I just kept right on reading. And in those early chapters where Benjen is talking to Jon, if you kind of read between the lines as a rereader, you can see pretty strong hints of his knowledge. I do well. Actually, I won't answer that. I won't say that because I think that's would be answering the next question.
Well, I mean, Donald Peoples says, was Benjen's joining the Night's Watch a form of punishment for his knowing about Rhaegar and Lyanna and not saying anything? My take on this one, perhaps this is what you're about to get into, but my take on this one is that I don't think it was punishment so much as him feeling huge guilt.
Yeah.
And we have to remember he was a child at this time, and he was the person who he was probably closest to Lyanna from everything we've seen. We've seen them playing together in a sort of a Bran vision. And we see when Lyanna's there sort of suggesting to Howland Reed about, you can go off at the turning of Harrenhal, you can go off and defend your honor, and Benjen's the one who says, I can find you some armor and all the rest of it. He's clearly the person who's closest to Lyanna, and is the person who will have known about what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And when you put yourself into that position, he then went up to Winterfell with this knowledge that there was a connection or whatever happened, and he will probably have been sworn to secrecy because it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't start spreading around. The next time that he met anyone from his family, quite literally, would have been when Ned arrived up north and the entire continent was at war over the fact that Lyanna and Rhaegar had gone off together. And he was the person who knew about this beforehand. And he will have been racked with guilt about this. He will not know what should he have told someone, what was going on. I'm sure he then told Ned everything he knew. I think that adds an extra level of kind of tragedy to Ned's story, that he then went into this whole war knowing that actually Lyanna hadn't been abducted. This was probably a lot more of a love match than Robert Baratheon was suggesting. And I think that the moment that Ned arrived back, and what we're told is that when Ned arrived back and baby Rob was there, that was when almost immediately Benjen went off to join the Night's Watch. And I don't think it was a punishment. The Starks tended not to see going to the wall as a punishment. This was more Benjen himself being racked with guilt over what had happened. I think probably unfairly on himself, because he was just a child and what could he have done, but it kind of makes sense. But what's your view?
Yeah, very much guilt. I mean, to pile on, if she was the Knight of the Laughing Tree, he had offered to collect all that armor for Howland to join the tourney to defend himself. Well, so Benjen is probably the one that provided Lyanna with the armor to be the Knight of the Laughing Tree, which arguably started the whole cycle. I mean, if you're a child and you're very simplistically looking at things, that brought her to Rhaegar's attention, and on from there. So yes, guilt, everything you said. So as a form of self-punishment only. But it's really interesting to reread Game of Thrones, and he's talking to Jon about how young he is. So Jon is 15 or nearly so. And that's Benjen couldn't have himself been any older than 14 going on 15 when he joined, because he was probably about 2 years younger than Lyanna. She was 16 when she died. So by the time, he might have been the exact same age as Jon, maybe a little bit older by the time he actually took off. But he is speaking from experience when he talks to Jon about what you're giving up and all this stuff and how young you are to be making this decision. But there's also the fact that it would be very dangerous for him to stay at Winterfell with the knowledge, more than two people can't keep a secret, so it was a form of expediency as well for him to just go off to the ends of the world where everyone would forget Benjen Stark ever existed, and he could take that knowledge with him. Howland Reed could vanish into the swamps of the Neck and take his knowledge with him, and Chardane could fake her own suicide and take her knowledge with her, which would just leave Ned. So you talk about the people that would have known the truth, they all sort of dealt with themselves, in their own ways, hiding that truth. So
yeah, I mean, I think I agree completely. And I think Benjen's story is one of many tragic stories, but it definitely is a tragic story that we've got going on here. He will be convinced that he could have stopped all of this, and he didn't. I think he's being unfair and harsh on himself, but I think that that's probably what he felt. And so, was it a punishment? I think it was his punishment on himself. Ned may well have been angry with him, but I don't think that Ned would have said, "Now you have to go off there." I think this was Benjen sending himself off.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, guys, we're gonna finish quite soon. We've got a final question. Maura Lee's asking, after which I think I'll probably sort of wrap up. But question is, what is the takeaway lesson from Rhaegar and Lyanna's story? Is it concerning prophecies? It doesn't matter whether prophecies are real or not. What would you say is the sort of the takeaway point or lesson from all of this?
Yeah, that's tough. But I mean, as far as prophecy, I mean, that is obviously a big part of it, I think. And, George talks a lot about prophecy, and we could, probably sit here for 2 more hours talking about just the things that George implies about prophecy, which is that they're perilous. The worst part of them is when you think you've got them figured out and you try to avoid them, or conversely, you try to make them come true. In either case, it almost always, turns around and comes back on you. If they're going to come true, I think what George likes to talk about or show us is them coming true in very strange and unexpected ways. He's got one of his favorite, if you read a lot or listen to a lot of George interviews, he's got a favorite story that he likes to tell from real world medieval history about a guy who, there was a prophecy that he was going to die at some certain castle, and he spent his life avoiding that specific castle. And then when the time came, he found himself at an inn hundreds of miles from this castle, but the sign of the inn was a picture of the castle that he had been avoiding for his entire life, and then he was killed or something, so it's just some very George kind of way of showing, prophecy's dangerous. And Rickard and Lyanna's story, I think, shows the danger of trying to, fulfill a prophecy.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, and it's also it is a tragic love story in a way. Is that I'm fully convinced that they were not there thinking, what, if we elope, then the entire continent's gonna burst into flames. It was just they reached their destination and then suddenly discovered that there was a civil war going on. I think that's what was going on there. The prophecy thing absolutely. I agree. It's Rhaegar was so driven by prophecy, and George R. R. Martin, his stance on all of these kind of things, to me, it's very clear. The truth, the reality of a prophecy, of a vision, is a lot less important than what people react, how they react to it. Rhaegar was convinced about prophecy, and that drove this story. He was absolutely fundamentally sure about everything. Turns out he was wrong about most things, but he was absolutely convinced about who the Principal's promise was going to be. First of all, he thought it was him, wrong. Then he thought it was his son Aegon, wrong. So he thought he had to have 3 children, a third of which was going to be a daughter, presumably, wrong. He got almost everything wrong, but the important thing is not whether the prophecy itself was true. The important thing was the fact that he believed it fundamentally, in the same way that Melisandre believes in prophecy fundamentally, in the same way that Cersei's actions are hugely influenced by her belief in prophecy fundamentally. So that is where George R. R. Martin seems to be coming from on all of this. And the takeaway from Rhaegar and Lyanna is the same takeaway we get from all the rest of it. It's about humans. It's not about the gods. It's not about magic. It's about humans and how we react to stuff and what we do with the information we've got. And with that, I'm going to start wrapping this up, but I did want to give you a chance. Lady Gwyn, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, okay, you can find me kind of all over the place. We have our website, radiowesteros.com. We have also got a Patreon. You can find, as I said, our podcasts on our YouTube channel as well. We always upload the audio there. So subscribe to us on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at Radio Westeros or me at Lady Guinevere. We have all the usual other things as well, Facebook and Tumblr, and you can just find us just about anywhere. But do check us out. We have lots of episodes that touch on all of the topics that we've been discussing today. Just released our 47th episode today. And we do fun trivia quizzes in between our regular episodes too, which I hope some of your listeners have enjoyed or will enjoy in the future.
Excellent. And as I say, I only ever invite people on here that I personally would recommend you go and check out their stuff. So I would highly recommend you go and check out Radio Westeros, which is an excellent podcast. You've also got the YouTube channel, which there will be a link in the chat. I'm going to put a link in the description if I haven't already, so please do go and check that one out. Radio Westeros is excellent. Guys, in terms of my stuff, I've already said, please do check out my second channel, which is The Well Told Tale, which is me audio narrating what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. We've just started on a new H.P. Lovecraft story, At the Mountains of Madness, which is a brilliant story. So I'd love you to check that one out. As for other stuff, people have been asking when the next of my Robert's Rebellion stories series of videos is coming out. That's going to be probably in a couple of weeks' time. I'm getting back into the rhythm of Wednesday for the my Well Told Tale, Friday for the Traveler's Guide, regular Thursday live streams as before. Tormund Redmayne, thank you so much for the super chat, saying thank you both for all your hard work and dedication. Thank you, I really appreciate that. Guys, if you are watching this later, then soon there's going to be little things appearing up here, things for you to click. Patrons, I cannot do this without you. I say this every time, but your support is what allows me to make videos like this. If you're at all interested in supporting the channel, or you would like to get access to some exclusive benefits, then please check out my Patreon page. There'll be a link appearing around here somewhere. If you would like to watch more live streams, there will be a link appearing up here somewhere. Thank you so much, Lady Gwyn. Thank you very much, everyone in the chat. Thank you for the super chats and everything. I will be back same time next week. Take care, everyone. I shall see you soon.